Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for attending my session. It's titled, You Cannot Have Inclusion Without the Arts. My name is Ifunanya Nweke. I'm an immigrant. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founder and the executive director of Jazz Hands for Autism. I'm also currently a doctor of education candidate at Rossier School of Education. And my primary focus is, I'm sure you can guess it, arts-based training for individuals with autism, specifically music-based training, and utilizing music as a way to build inclusion and integration within the classroom and beyond. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm happy to be here. So this is going to be kind of interactive. I'm going to ask you some questions to answer in the chat. So please do feel free to answer in the chat. It's really helpful to see other people's responses as well. But I'll also have some potential solutions and answers for you to some of your questions that you may have. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first question I have for you is, does your school have a music program for students in special education? So if you can just go ahead and respond in the chat, that'd be super helpful. I'll just give us about 10 seconds there to just respond and take a look at other people's responses as well. Okay. Just counting down in my head. Let's go ahead and just put your responses in. And it's, this is a no pressure answer. Just a quick yes or no is fine. Okay. All right. So surprise, most schools do not have a program, a music program for students in special education, right? All right. I have another question for you, right? The next one is, how often as teachers and instructors and subject matter experts, how often do you incorporate music into your lesson plans for your students in special education or for your students with special needs? So go ahead and just quickly just answer. It can just be, often, rarely, always. You can just use, just one word answers in the chat. So I'll give us about, 5 more seconds to go ahead and respond in the chat. Okay. All right. So, okay, so let's see. I'm sure for many of you, it may not be as often as you'd like, right? So the question essentially is, beyond the hello song, how often is music a core part of your lesson plan? Do you use music to teach other academic or core subjects? So just, keep that in mind, right? So up next, these are questions that need answers. So all these questions that I ask, these are questions that need answers. And I have a few more questions for you in general, just for you to keep in mind, right? If research shows, and there is research that shows this, that music is an effective tool for skill building and generalization of acquired skills, why is music education and music-based curriculum not mandatory in special education programs? Questions that need answers. And potentially, I may have some answers for you. So I want to start with facts and stats. This is a big part of who I am. I love facts. I love stats. So I like to always just have some really solid information to just kind of back some of the questions and some of the solutions that I'm going to be presenting. So the first thing is that 3.8 million students in the United States have no access to music education. And also 13% of all public school students are receiving special education. On top of that, 1 in 54 Americans are on the autism spectrum, and at least 50,000 of these individuals turn 18 every year, and there's a significant drop in services available to adults on the autism spectrum after they leave high school. And then lastly, over 85% of adults on the autism spectrum are unemployed or underemployed. It may seem as if that these are just a bunch of different stats on paper, but these things actually do tie in together. There's a reason why many individuals with autism, after they graduate and matriculate out of high school or out of the school system, have very limited access to services and are not able to integrate fully into their communities. And my thing is that I believe that has a lot to do with the kind of programming that we provide to them during the K through 12 or K through 22 education system, and the lack of arts and music within it. So up next, we have some music facts and stats. So one, music has been proven to be a universal language. I know that, I'm sure many of you have heard that, music is a universal language. It's been used colloquially, just in conversation, but there's actual experiments that have been done to prove that it in fact is a universal language. Music education is also associated with music education also provides quick feedback and small wins that students can refer back to help build self-efficacy. Music-based interventions and shared musical experiences facilitate non-verbal interaction between two parties and thereby encourage social interactions, scaffolding learning, and communication through the music. Music has also been shown to promote increased emotional perception, regulation, and expression in individuals on the autism spectrum as they develop along the lifespan. And then studies show that music promotes neuroplasticity that can bridge gaps left by various disorders and developmental delays. Studies also show that there's a strong positive relationship between music and learning in other subject areas. And then lastly, studies show that schools with music programs have an estimated of 90.2 graduation rate and 93.9% attendance rate compared with schools without music education. So all this being said, why is this important to your work, right? Why are all these facts and all these stats and music and the arts important to your work? So I have a quick question for you. Or rather, I have a comment to say, simply put, music may be a great ally in your lesson plan development and your teaching practice cut that part. Simply put, music may be a great ally in your lesson plan development, your teaching practice, and your classroom engagement with your students, specifically those who have special needs. And so here are some of the competencies that you will be able to do at the end of this talk. So number one is identify 2 points of evidence to support the needs for arts and special education programs. So one big thing, the two big things here today are the evidence to support why arts are important with our students who are in special education, and two, some competencies specifically for you as instructors and practitioners that can help make music education and just music more accessible to your neurodivergent learners in your classroom. So right now, we're just gonna revisit a couple more stats, right? So I've said this before, but just to keep in mind, 3.8 million students in the US have no access to music education. And 13% of all public school students are receiving special education. So it means that there are quite a few people who are in special education that are not receiving any access to music education at all. I've seen this in my own practice. I've worked in the schools, I've worked in the homes, I worked in several different places as a behavior interventionist. And one thing that I noticed is that there was a lack of access to music, especially for those who are in special education. And if music is so powerful, why is that not mandatory? Why is that not an important part of their curriculum? And then music also studies also show that music has strong positive relationships with learning in other subject areas. And then lastly, music-based interactions can help facilitate inclusion and integration within your classrooms, within your general ed classrooms where you have some students who may be mainstreamed, right? So let's go ahead and continue. Quick question for you. I have a lot of questions. I'm a big question asker because the more questions you ask, potentially the more answers you can discover. So the question here is, what are some of the biggest challenges you face when teaching your students in special education? So I'm gonna give you all just a little bit of time to just, maybe about 10 seconds to just answer that in the chat. It can just be a short answer. It can be, just keywords. But what are some of the biggest challenges you face when teaching your students in special education or your students who have special needs? So just a few more seconds here. Okay. Let's keep it going. Let's get the chat going. All right, so let's see. I'm just going to assume that some of your answers have to do with relevance of the curriculum or relevance of the topic to the student. And some of it has to do with inclusion with your students who have your students with special needs into your gen ed classrooms, or just inclusion within your special education classrooms. And also engagement, how to make sure that your students with special needs are engaged in the actual learning and the actual motion of the class, right? So those are some of the biggest challenges that I've heard. I'm just gonna assume that those are some of your biggest challenges too when teaching your students with special needs, right? So let's start with some suggestions that I have that may be able to help with some of these challenges. So once again, it's relevance, it's inclusion and engagement, right? So I'm gonna be addressing those three main things in this conversation today and in this presentation today. So the first thing is culturally responsive teaching. So this is the first practitioner competency. This is practitioner competency number 1, right? So this is important because home doesn't end when you get to the classroom. For example, bilingual students, especially those who have special needs, although they speak English in the classroom, they may speak a different language at home. So bringing their cultures into the classroom can create a safe space for exploration, right? It can allow them to maybe open up more in the classroom and maybe be more engaged, and it can make the classroom topics a little bit more relevant to your students, right? Cut this part out. My notes aren't showing. Okay. So yes, once again, home doesn't end when you get to the classroom. For example, bilingual students, especially those who have special needs, although they may speak English in the classroom, they may speak a different language at home. So bringing their cultures into the classroom can create a safe space for skill exploration. And so it's important to take inventory of the different cultures you have in the classroom, right? Find, and once you take inventory, so kind of discover, get to know your students, see what cultures are represented in your classroom. Maybe there's like Latino culture, maybe there's like, East Asian culture, maybe there's Middle Eastern culture, maybe there's African American culture, maybe there's African culture, maybe there's Caribbean culture. Just take a really good inventory of what cultures you have in the classroom, because when you're able to engage students' cultures and backgrounds, you're able to kind of bring them into a safe space and a comfortable place where they can feel more open potentially to be able to engage in the lesson at hand, right? So first you take inventory of the various cultures in the classroom. Then after you've taken that, then you go in and find music from each culture, right? So just after you take the inventory, you have a list of the different cultures that are represented in your class. Find music for each culture, and then frame your lessons and your lesson plans around some cultural songs, right? So even if it's an academic or a core subject, find a way to incorporate music into that beyond the hello song, right? Find a way to incorporate music into the teaching of the lesson, and then observe your students' response to that lesson. It's important to take all these steps, because not only do you want to take inventory of what cultures you have in the classroom, you also want to be able to, after you've implemented these steps, see how your students are responding. Are they responding positively? What kind of trends are you seeing? Data is a very, very big part of improving your teaching approach. So I have a helpful tool that can be able to help you with that, right? It's a very, very simple tool, and it's going to be used for all the different competencies that I'm going to share today. It's just a simple table that helps you lay out different components of your lesson over the span of a few weeks or even a term, right? So a semester or a quarter. And this table can also help with scaffolding. So pause that. Excuse me. This table can also help with scaffolding more complex topics and using the different tools to teach those same topics, right? So for example, if you have, say for example, you're teaching academic subjects, so maybe you're teaching English, right? So finding a way to, to teach the more complex topics over time, over more time, and then maybe using different cultural music to teach the same topic, and see how your different students engage with that, right? And so with this, on this table, especially where it's highlighted in red, right, you can keep track of how culturally relevant your lesson plans are, by indicating the culture that you're addressing in each topic and each week, right? So, so once again, just take a quick look at this table. I'm going to be utilizing it for all the different competencies, and we have 3 competencies. So I just finished with one. The first one was culturally relevant teaching, right? Up next, we have gamification of learning objectives, right? So typically, when we hear the term gamification, we think of video games, but gamification can also mean games in general, and which includes in-person or in-classroom games. This can also provide choices that create autonomy support for learning. So what autonomy support is just kind of creating a structure that allows your students to feel free to explore their learning at their own pace. So for this specific competency here, I have a few steps that I've outlined. So you can also frame, not only can you attach, cultural songs and cultural music to your lessons. You can also frame each lesson after you selected a song as an interactive musical game. So a few steps to do that is, one, divide your students into groups. So I'm just going to use here 3 groups, right? And then assign a support staff to each group. So I'm assuming that you're going to have some, if you're teaching a special education class or a gen ed class with students with special needs, you may have additional support staff on there. So, in there. So whether that's a teaching assistant, a behavior interventionist, etc. After you divide your students into groups, assign a support staff to each of those groups, right? And then select team leaders. And so the team leaders are actually students. So they're not staff in your classroom. They're team leaders that are students, right? So you want to encourage pro-social and peer learning here, right? And so the team leaders are the ones who are going to kind of be it's essentially like you're the instructor or you're the teacher, the support staff supporting the groups, and the team leader is the one who kind of takes lead on organizing their group members or their peers, in addition to the support staff, right? And then after that, assign interactive parts to each student group, or have the students pick up each group pick a part. For example, if it's a music class, you can have one group play the hand drums or just simple percussion, and then another group play, the piano, or just kind of be in charge of the melody. Maybe they can sing a melody, and then the third group can write a short song, or like kind of come up with a few words that will help, kind of bring, remove that. And then the third group can just either write a song or come up with some lyrics that is in alignment with the topic of the week, and the culture that's being represented in class that day, right? So you have, in this example, I have 3 groups, right? So I have a percussion group or a rhythm section, right? Then I have a melody section, which is the piano or the singing, and then I also then have the lyrics section, who's coming up with the words that match, once again, the culture being represented and also the topic of the week, right? So up next, I'm just gonna kind of bring you back to this table again. So this table, like I said, can be utilized for all the different competencies that I'm discussing today. So at first, you see right here where I said the culture being addressed. Up next is highlight up next, I've highlighted the row that says the number of groups, right? So the number of groups, cut this part out. The number of groups can help you just identify what are the different, excuse me. The number of groups row on this table can help you kind of just itemize and identify what groups do you have in today's lesson, or in that week's lesson plan. Do you have a rhythm section? Do you have a melody section? Do you have the lyrics section? And or do you have more sections than that? And how many groups do you have? What is each group doing, right? And so feel, once again, pause. So yeah, so you can identify the number of the groups, what each oh my gosh. Okay, so yes, once again, using this tool, you can identify the number of the groups that you have in your class and in your lesson that day, and you can also identify what each of these groups are doing. So I would advise that if you're doing that within this table, that you use that in the same row, the same box. So you identify each group and then what those groups are doing. So once again, just a reminder, this tool is open for your customization. So this is just a very, very simple table. You can always recreate this and readjust it for your own usage, right? So, okay, so up next, I'm gonna lead you to the last and the final competency that I'm gonna be sharing with you today. The next one is encouraging peer mentors. This is competency number 3. And so pro-social behavior, that's what this competency goes towards. So pro-social behavior, such as providing support to others, helps build self-efficacy, in addition to the feedback from the music, right? So go back to those team leaders that you had in competency number 2 in the gamification of your learning objectives, and then have those team leaders are essentially their peer mentors. And so in that classroom, you're encouraging pro-social behavior. So not only will the student who's the team leader be able to facilitate and facilitate learning for their peers and being in a leadership position, but their peers, by seeing them in that role, will also see them as a competent and also a similar model who they can learn from, right? And that also helps build confidence and self-efficacy, and ultimately helps build motivation and engagement in your classroom. So this competency is associated with engagement. So once again, going back to the gamification, this is an extension of that gamification, right? So after the groups have kind of come up with, with their parts. So we have the percussion part, the rhythm section coming up with the drum beats. You have the piano section or the melody section coming up with the melody. And then you have the lyrics section coming up with the words that are in alignment with the topic of the week. Then you can have the team leader share out each group's work, right? So maybe that team leader can either be the one to play the drums, play the piano part, or sing or recite the lyrics to the rest of the class, right? But one thing that you can do is, once again, to encourage what I call autonomy support. Autonomy support is so important, right? So once again, autonomy support is you're helping your students be in charge of their own learning, but you're providing a structure around them to help facilitate that learning, right? So what you can do to provide that autonomy support is to provide a script or an outline for sharing out. The script can be, just a simple thing like, this is the rhythm section, we're going to be playing this. This is the percussion, this is the piano section, we're going to be playing this. And for those who are nonverbal, please do feel free to engage them, and please do feel free to put them in the team leadership position, and use visuals that they can point at and then encourage the rest of their group to share out. So this is not limited only to individuals who may be verbal or have more words. You can also engage your students who have fewer words or who are nonverbal in these competencies as well. So have the team leader share out, provide a script to them, or it can just be on a board. It mustn't be a paper script. It can just be on a board, and you can point to it as the instructor and say, okay, now it's your turn to share out. And then if you see any students in the groups, in the different groups that, from competency number 2, if you see any students struggling in those groups, encourage the support staff to assign the peer mentor to assist the struggling student, which further solidifies that pro-social behavior, right? So the reason why peer mentors is really helpful, especially in gen ed classes or mixed special education class, mixed level special education class, is because in your classroom, inevitably, there will be students with varying skill levels, right? So one way to leverage your students who have more skills is to have them assist other students in helping build out their skills and their self-efficacy as well. This also contributes to what Vygotsky, it's a learning theory, in the social cultural learning theory. Vygotsky has something called the zone of proximal development, right? And the zone of proximal development helps. It's essentially current skill plus 1. So you're scaffolding that, in the peer mentors and in the peers that are being mentored by the team leader as well. So I'm just going to go back really quickly, just so that we can remember all the competencies, right? So competency number 1, just in case you forgot, was culturally responsive teaching, right? So what you do is you take inventory of the cultures you have in your classroom, you pick music from those cultures, and then you frame your lesson topics and your lesson objectives around those topics. But it's important that you observe how your students are responding to each different culture that is being shared, so you can see who's more engaged and who's less engaged in the different cultural expressions. Right? Once again, here's a tool again that I share with you that's used for all these 3 competencies. Up next, competency number 2 is gamification of your learning objectives. One way to do that is with your classroom games, by dividing your class into groups and assigning different tasks and objectives. So like assigning different tasks and objectives to each of those groups that are still in alignment with your topic of the week, and also maybe the cultural song that you've selected from competency number 1. Then after this, you are encouraged to encourage peer mentors and pro-social learning by having team leaders not only share out, but also support other students who are in the classroom or who are in their groups that they may be struggling with the objectives or the topics of that day, right? So, and once again, this is the table here. In the peer mentor row, you can feel free to just identify who's a peer mentor. You can write their names or their initials. You can write their names or their initials, and you can kind of identify, maybe some of their strengths, maybe some of their areas for growth. And that way, that can also help you see, how your students, where your students' strengths are beyond just their strengths, in their academic subjects too. You can see where they have the most confidence, the most self-efficacy, and the most motivation, and see how that also having a peer mentor may affect their motivation moving forward as well. So I've shared a lot of information so far, right? So just some keywords to keep in mind beyond these competencies are some keywords to keep in mind beyond these competencies are autonomy support, zone of proximal development, self-efficacy, self-confidence, and motivation. Keep those things in mind because those things are very, very important, especially when you're working with your students who have special needs. So all that being said, I now have a question for you, right? This is my final question. What is one way that you plan to incorporate these competencies and this tool in your teaching moving forward? So please respond in the chat. It can be one word answer, it can be a statement, it can be a paragraph. That all depends on you, but I just want to hear from you. What is one way or a few ways, if you feel like sharing more, that you plan to incorporate these competencies into your teaching moving forward? And as a reminder, the competency number 1 is culturally responsive teaching. Number 2 is gamification of your learning objectives. And number 3 is encouraging peer mentors and pro-social learning. So going to give us, a few more seconds to respond in the chat. And you can feel free to keep responding in the chat. I'm going to be coming up to the close of this presentation, but go ahead and keep responding. And I'm excited to, read what you have written. Okay. So thank you all so much for being a part of my presentation. It was very short, very sweet, and just all in all surrounding the importance of music and arts in your teaching practice, whether or not you're teaching music itself or if you're teaching different academic or core subjects. I think that using music and using these tools in a musical way can really, really help you increase the relevance of the topic to your students, increase the inclusion of your students with special needs with your gen ed students, or increase inclusion within your special education classroom. And lastly, also increase engagement for all students, especially your students who have special needs. Because music is very, very important. Music really helps build self-efficacy. It helps build bridges. It helps build social communication. And so you want to utilize music as much as you can in your teaching practice and your and in your lesson planning and development. So thank you all so much. I do have my contact information right here. This is my email. It's n.nweke@jazzhandsforautism.org. And you can see more of my work and more of the work that we're doing in my organization at www.jazzhandsforautism.org. We definitely utilize a lot of these competencies in the way that we provide structure and provide instruction and opportunities to our musicians at Jazz Hands. So once again, thank you so much. The next couple of slides are just my references. Like I said, I am a doctoral student, so references are very important. These are in APA 7 style. So feel free to, kind of take a look at these references on your own to see more, kind of more robust, details about some of the things that I touched upon today. Most of these references are surrounding the importance of music as it relates to the social and emotional development and also learning for individuals with autism, right? And then lastly, I just have an appendix, which is the lesson planning tool. So feel free to take a screenshot of this and develop it, build it out on your own in a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet, or you can just use this one. I mean, it's not very flexible because it is when you take a screenshot, it is an image. So do feel free to build your own out and customize it as in your own way. But this right here is just a very, very simple way for you to not only lay out your lessons, but also plan and also incorporate some of these competencies as you plan your lessons moving forward. So once again, my name is Ifu Nanyonweke. I am the executive director at Jazz Hands for Autism. I'm a doctoral student at Rossier School of Education at USC. And I'm overall just very, very happy to have had a time to share some of my thoughts and some of my discoveries and some of my learnings with you as well. So have a blessed day. Thank you so much.